The first thing I learned after marrying Richard was the sound of a closing door. Not a slam, which implies passion, a fleeting loss of control, but the soft, deliberate click of a lock turning the sound of possession. It was the sound that defined the borders of my world, a world encased within the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse apartment. From this height, the city sprawled below like a galaxy of captive stars. A breathtaking, silent vista that only served to amplify my own profound isolation. I was another object in his collection, like the sterile modern art on the walls and the first edition books that were never opened, perfectly curated, immensely valuable, and locked securely in place. Tonight, the air was thick with the scent of roasted capon, thyme, and the subtle, metallic tang of my own fear. It was a fragrance meant to signal warmth, abundance, and celebration for the anniversary gala he was hosting. In reality, it was the cloying smell of performance. I moved through the gleaming marble kitchen. My reflection, a ghostly, elongated twin in the polished chrome of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. My hands, steady as a surgeon's, performed the methodical task of basting the bird. It was a practiced rhythm, a small, repetitive action that kept the screaming chaos in my mind at bay. Beneath the long, silk cuff of my blouse, the deep purple bruise on my wrist throbbed with a dull, constant H. It was a perfect handprint. His handprint. A lesson from the previous night on the importance of buying the correct brand of sparkling water. "Is it so difficult?" Eleanor, he'd whispered, his grip tightening until I saw stars. "To follow one simple instruction? Or is your incompetence a deliberate act of defiance?" The bruise was a secret pulse, counting down the minutes until his family, the judges of this silent, ongoing trial, would arrive. "Eleanor, your posture." Richard's voice was a low murmur from the doorway, a silken thread of sound that carried more immediate threat than a shout ever could. My spine snapped straight instantly, a Pavlovian response honed over 6 years of relentless conditioning. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. I could feel his presence filling the space, a cold front moving through the warm, fragrant air. He glided into the kitchen, a phantom in a bespoke suit, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. His gaze wasn't on me, but on the room itself, a hawk scanning its territory for any sign of weakness, any imperfection. He paused by the entryway, his reflection captured in a large, framed abstract photograph. For a barest second, his eyes flicked to a smaller, silver-framed picture on a nearby console table, a stern, unsmiling man with Richard's eyes. His own father. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his own reflection momentarily hardening into the same severe lines before the mask of effortless control slid back into place. "My family and my board members will be here in less than an hour. I trust you've ensured everything is flawless," he stated. Not asked. "Of course." "Richard." My voice was a carefully constructed melody, light and airy, a confection of sound designed to soothe the beast. He finally moved to the island, his gaze falling upon the bubbling, golden skin of the capon. "It appears adequate," he said. "For once, you've followed the instructions precisely. Let's hope you can maintain that level of competence for the rest of the evening." The faintest of praise, immediately sharpened into a weapon. At the other end of the vast island, supposedly sketching in her notebook, sat our 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Her tablet was propped against a stack of art books. I knew she wasn't sketching. She was observing, always observing. Her small face, a perfect mask of quiet concentration. Those startlingly intelligent eyes. My eyes missed nothing. At 8, she had become a master cartographer of her father's moods. able to navigate the shifting, treacherous landscapes of his temper, with a skill that shamed and terrified me. She knew the subtle tightening of his jaw that preceded a storm, the dangerous, predatory stillness that fell just before the earth-shattering quake. "Are you all right, Mother?" she asked softly, her pencil hovering over the page. The formal address was her own invention, a small shield of propriety she held up against the chilling informality of his cruelty. The question felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. How many times had I plastered on a smile for her? A flimsy, pathetic bandage over a gaping wound. How many times had I lied to that beautiful, trusting face? "Daddy's just had a long day. He's under a lot of pressure. We're fine. Darling, everything is fine. I'm fine. My love," I whispered. The lie a familiar, bitter acid on my tongue. I could feel her gaze on me, analytical and unwavering. Lily's pencil stilled. Her eyes, dark and knowing, lifted from her page and met mine. "No, you're not." Before I could form another lie, Richard's attention drifted to her. "What is this?" he asked, his voice laced with the casual disdain he reserved for anything he considered beneath him. "It's my project," Lily said, not looking at him. "My digital time capsule. For me, when I'm older." "A time capsule," Richard scoffed, a small, humorless smile touching his lips. How sentimental, how utterly childish. "I want to remember everything," she said, her voice small but infused with a strange, steely quality. She finally lifted her head, and her dark, serious eyes met his, the good and the bad. "So I know what's real." For a fleeting second, Richard's confident smirk faltered. He saw something in his 8-year-old daughter's eyes that he didn't recognize. Something he couldn't control. A flicker of ancient, unyielding judgment. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of bored irritation. "Go to your room, Lily. The adults need to prepare." "But my work?" "Now." The single word was sharp and cold as a shard of glass. Lily gathered her things with a slow, deliberate grace that was a miniature, defiant echo of his own controlled movements. As she slid off the stool, her small hand found mine under the cover of the island and squeezed. A fleeting, desperate gesture of solidarity that nearly shattered my carefully constructed composure. At the kitchen doorway, she paused and looked back. Not at me, but directly at her father. "Be kind to Mother," she said, her voice clear and simple. Yet, it reverberated through the silent kitchen like a judgment. "She's worked very hard today." Richard's jaw went rigid. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his daughter issuing a command left him momentarily speechless. I saw the dangerous flash in his eyes, the way his knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists at his sides. "Lily, go," I urged, my voice tight with a sudden, sharp panic, trying to push her with my words out of the direct line of fire. She gave a small, solemn nod and disappeared down the long, white corridor. But I saw the determined set of her small jaw, a look so much like my own father's when he was preparing to dismantle a hostile witness on the stand. "That child," Richard muttered, his gaze turning back to me. The fury he couldn't unleash on Lily now, seeking a new target. "She's becoming defiant. You're encouraging it, filling her head with your sentimental weakness. She's just a child." "Richard." "She's protective." Protective. His voice dropped to that chilling, intimate whisper that was far more terrifying than his rage. It was the voice he used just before he hurt me. Or have you been telling her stories, turning my own daughter into a weapon against me? His daughter. Never ours. As if I were merely the incubator. A vessel for his legacy? No. Richard. Never. Because if I find out you have... He took a step closer, invading my space, his shadow falling over me. There will be consequences you cannot possibly imagine. His rage was a physical thing, a suffocating pressure in the air. He needed an outlet, a release. His furious gaze swept the room and landed on a small side table by the archway to the living room. On it sat a small, hand-painted porcelain music box, its delicate ballerinas frozen mid-twirl. It was the last gift my mother had given me before the cancer took her. A fragile vessel of a happy memory. I remembered her pressing it into my hands. So you never forget the music, Eleanor, she'd whispered, even when the world is silent. Richard didn't even seem to see it for what it was. It was simply an object in the path of his fury, a symbol of a past he couldn't control. With a guttural snarl, he swept his arm across the table's surface. The music box flew through the air, hitting the marble floor with a sickening, final crash that echoed in the cavernous space. It shattered into a dozen pieces, the tiny, tinkling melody of its mechanism dying with a final, choked sigh. I stared at the wreckage, at the splinters of porcelain and melody scattered like bones across the pristine floor. He hadn't just broken a thing, he had broken a memory. A had deliberately, violently, silenced the last echo of my mother's love. I felt a sob rise in my throat. Araf. Ragged thing. But I choked it down, swallowing the shards of my own grief. Crying would only make it worse. The doorbell chimed. A bright, cheerful sound that was a profanity in the sudden, broken silence. Richard straightened his tie, the rage vanishing from his face as if it had never been. The charming, powerful husband was back in place, the mask seamless and utterly terrifying. He turned to me, to the unshed tears burning my eyes, and offered a cold, thin smile as he reached out and adjusted the collar of my blouse, his fingers brushing against my skin in a final, chilling assertion of ownership. Showtime, he said. Remember, darling, we are the perfect family. That night, long after the last guest had departed, leaving behind a wake of empty glasses and the lingering ghost of fake laughter, I found myself on my hands and knees on the cold marble floor. I collected the shattered pieces of my mother's music box, my fingers careful to avoid the sharpest edges. Each fragment was a tiny, dead star. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury, an indulgence Richard monitored and punished. Instead, a cold, dense numbness settled deep in my bones. This was my life now, a careful collection of broken things, pieced together in the dark to maintain a flawless facade by daylight. A few days later, the silence in the apartment was a living entity. Richard was on a 2-day business trip to Zurich, and the release of pressure was so profound, it was almost painful, like the rush of blood back into a limb that has fallen asleep. It was in this quiet reprieve that I found the truth. I needed to email Lily's school about an upcoming field trip and, with her permission, I picked up her tablet from the desk in her room. Her home screen was a picture of the two of us at the beach years ago, before Richard had finished sanding away all my edges, before my smile became a carefully rehearsed gesture. My finger hovered over the email icon, but another folder caught my eye. It was labeled simply, Clinically Time Capsule. A flicker of maternal curiosity, a desire to see what my daughter deemed worthy of her future self, made me touch the screen. The folder opened not to drawings or happy selfies, but to a list of video and audio files. The names were chillingly precise: 202510152147, living room verbal, 2 0 2 5 1 0 2 8 1 9 2, kitchen, physical, 202511042230. Hallway argument. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. My hand, slick with a sudden, cold sweat, trembled as I pressed on the most recent file. The one from the night he broke the music box. The screen remained dark, but the audio was terrifyingly clear. First, Richard's voice. A low, guttural snarl. Consequences you cannot possibly imagine. Then, the sound of his arm sweeping across the table. The horrible, percussive crash of porcelain on marble. And the final, choked sigh of the music mechanism. It was followed by a long, dead silence, broken only by the sound of my own ragged, suppressed breathing. I clicked on another file. Kitchen, physical. This one had video. The angle was low and shaky, filmed from behind a large vase on the kitchen island. I saw Richard's back, then saw him turn. I saw him grab my arm, the one with the now fading bruise. I saw my own face, contorted in a mask of pain and pleading. I watched myself, a stranger on a screen, as my husband twisted my arm until I gasped, his face a mask of cold. Righteous fury. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back from the desk, the tablet clutched in my hands like a venomous snake. He had seen my daughter, my sweet, innocent Lily, had not just seen these moments. She had catalogued them, curated them, preserved them with the cold precision of a museum archivist. That evening, I confronted her. I found her curled on her window seat, reading a book, the city lights twinkling behind her like 1,000 unsympathetic eyes. I held up the tablet, my own face reflected, pale and terrified. On its dark screen, "What is this?" "Lily," I whispered, my voice hoarse. She didn't feign ignorance. She carefully placed a bookmark in her novel and looked at me, her expression serious and steady. "It's the truth." "Mother, this is not the truth. This is a death sentence." The words tore from my throat, raw and frantic. I rushed to her side, kneeling before her, my hands gripping her small shoulders. "You don't understand what he is. He's not just a man with a temper. He will destroy you for this. Lily, not just me. You. Do you understand? He will crush you." My fear was a wild animal, clawing at the inside of my chest. All I could see was Richard's face if he found this. The cold, reptilian stillness that would come over him before he struck. And this time, his rage wouldn't be for me. It would be for the small, brave, foolish child who had dared to bear witness. "He won't find it," she said calmly. "He finds everything I insisted." My voice cracking. This is evidence you've been plotting against him. He'll take you away from me. He'll say I put you up to it. He will ruin us." In that moment of pure, unadulterated terror, I did the only thing a cornered animal knows how to do. I tried to destroy the threat. I scrambled back to her desk, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control my fingers. I navigated to the folder, my thumb hovering over the delete icon. I would erase it all. I would bury the truth so deep it could never hurt my child. I would trade our freedom for her safety. It was a mother's desperate, guilty calculus. "Don't." Lily's voice was quiet, but it stopped my thumb mid-press. I looked up. She was standing beside me now, her small hand resting on my arm. There were no tears in her eyes, only a profound and heartbreaking disappointment. Deleting it won't make it untrue. "Mother," she said. Her voice weighted with a wisdom no 8-year-old should possess. "It just means no one will ever believe us. It means you'll be sad forever." She took the tablet from my trembling hands. I had a better plan at first. She confessed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I tried to set up a live stream, a constant feed from a hidden camera, straight to Grandpa's secure server. I read about it online. My blood ran cold. Lily. No. It didn't work, she said, a flicker of frustration in her eyes. He has a firewall on the network. A really good one. It blocks all unauthorized outbound connections. I tried for a week to find a workaround. He's locked us in. Even the internet. The sophistication of his control, his technological imprisonment, was a new layer of horror. He hadn't just closed the doors. He had severed the digital lifelines. Lily then reached for the small backpack she used for school. Dangling from the zipper was a small, whimsical keychain. A silver cat with emerald eyes. She twisted the cat's head. It came apart, revealing the tiny, metallic nub of a USB drive. I can't stream it out, she said, her eyes boring into mine, willing me to understand, to be brave, so I'll carry it out. I've been saving only the most important moments, the worst ones. It's encrypted. He'll never know. The following Sunday, during my weekly video call with my father, I tried to keep my voice light. He was a retired judge, a man whose life had been dedicated to parsing truth from fiction, and his perception was as sharp as a scalpel. He sat in his leather-chaired study, surrounded by law books, his face kind, but his eyes missing nothing. You look tired, Eleanor, he observed gently, peering at me through the screen. Is Richard working you too hard with this gala? I'm just a bit stressed. Dad, you know how these things are. I lied, the words feeling clumsy and false in my mouth. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. He knew I was lying, but he also knew I wouldn't, or couldn't, tell him the truth. So he did what he always did. He offered wisdom cloaked in abstraction. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair. It reminds me of an old case, a very complex one. The prosecution had a single, grainy photograph, and they tried to build their entire case on it. It fell apart under cross-examination. He met my gaze through the screen, his own eyes kind but firm. Remember what I taught you about the law. Ellie, one person's word is a story. It can be dismissed, but corroborated evidence. That's a fact. Medical reports, financial statements, witness testimony, recordings. Those are the pillars of a case. Never rely on a single photograph when you can build a fortress of truth. The call ended, but his words hung in the silent apartment. I looked over at Lily's backpack, at the silver cat with its emerald eyes. It was no longer a child's trinket. It was a pillar. It was a bomb, and the weight of our shared, terrible secret settled over me, heavy and suffocating as a shroud. The night of the gala arrived like a verdict. Our penthouse, usually a temple of minimalist silence and controlled aesthetics, was transformed. It throbbed with the murmur of 100 carefully modulated conversations, the delicate clinking of crystal flutes, and the smooth, unobtrusive melodies of a hired string quartet playing something by Vivaldi. It was the perfect soundtrack for a perfect life. I moved through the impeccably dressed crowd, a ghost in a sapphire silk gown that Richard had selected. My smile, a masterpiece of muscular engineering. It felt brittle, as though it might crack and fall from my face. I was Eleanor Whitman, the gracious, beautiful wife of the brilliant Richard Whitman, celebrating his promotion to the board and their 10-year anniversary. Inside, my stomach was a tight, cold knot of dread, and the silk of the dress felt like a straitjacket against my skin. Richard's family descended first. not as guests arriving for a party, but as a conquering army arriving to inspect their territory. His mother, Beatrice, swept in, a formidable galleon draped in pearls and a scent that smelled of old money and fresh disapproval. Her eyes, the same cold, calculating gray as her son's, performed a swift, brutal inventory of my appearance. The decor, the quality of the champagne being served. Nothing escaped her critical gaze. "Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice a syrupy poison as she kissed the air beside my cheek. Her skin papery and cold. "That color is bold. One must be so careful not to look garish at our age." She then turned to a woman I recognized as the wife of another board member and whispered, her voice a perfectly audible stage whisper, "She trees so disparately. Bless her heart. But you simply can't buy breeding." The woman gave a tight, uncomfortable smile and quickly looked away. I felt the familiar burn of shame creep up my neck. Hot and suffocating. But my own smile remained flawlessly, glacially in place. His sister, Catherine, was more direct. Her cruelty honed to a finer, sharper point. She cornered me by the floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered a dazzling, indifferent view of the city lights. Her own husband, a soft, silent man, trailed behind her like a well-fed lapdog. "Eleanor," she began, her smile, all teeth and malice. "You look absolutely exhausted. I suppose it must be dreadfully taxing, keeping up with a man like Richard. All that ambition." Before I could formulate a polite, meaningless reply, she raised her glass to a small, influential group that had gathered nearby. "A toast," she declared, her voice ringing with a false, brittle cheer. "To my brilliant brother, Richard, of course, but also to his new partner, David, and his truly brilliant wife, Melissa." She turned her laser-like gaze to a sharp-looking woman in a tailored Armani suit who was deep in conversation with a banker. "It's just so wonderful that Richard finally has someone who is his intellectual equal to strategize with. A true meeting of the minds." The barb, so perfectly aimed, struck home with surgical precision. The implication was clear. Delivered for the benefit of Richard's new corporate circle, I was a decorative simpleton, not his equal. The small group murmured their assent, raising their glasses. I watched Richard across the room. He had heard her. He smiled, a proud, deeply gratified expression on his face, and raised his glass high in Catherine's direction. A public endorsement of her insult. He was basking in it. It was another public confirmation of my inadequacy. Another brick in the wall he had built around me. And he savored it. My smile didn't falter. But inside, something cold and vital began to fracture into 1,000 tiny pieces. I caught Lily's eye. She was moving through the party with a silver tray of canapés. A miniature professional in a simple, dark velvet dress. She looked like an angel. Her face a mask of serene childhood innocence that no one thought to look past. No one would ever guess the truth. No one saw the tiny, almost imperceptible way she shifted the tray to her left hand as she passed Catherine's group, allowing her right hand to dip into the hidden pocket of her dress. I knew what was in there. The spy pen. Its lens no bigger than a pinprick. Its microphone sensitive enough to capture every whispered cruelty. I saw her thumb press the nearly invisible button on its top. The tiny red light I knew was there would have blinked once, invisibly, and then gone dark. She was recording. The tablet, I knew, was sitting on a side table in the living room, propped up behind a floral arrangement, and ostensibly charging. Its microphone was live, capturing the ambient sound of the party. The poisonous words. The false laughs. and streaming the audio file directly to a solid-state hard drive hidden in the back of her closet. My 8-year-old daughter was not a child tonight. She was an intelligence operative on a mission. A silent, meticulous archivist of her mother's slow-motion execution. The breaking point. The moment the carefully constructed facade of my life was destined to shatter, came in the form of Charles Davenport, Richard's boss and the chairman of the board. He was a jovial, portly man with a booming voice, and he navigated the crowd toward Richard with the self-importance of a battleship cutting through water. "Richard. My boy," he bellowed, clapping him on the shoulder with enough force to make a lesser man stumble. "A spectacular party. Simply spectacular." He beamed at me, his eyes crinkling. "And Eleanor, you look radiant. As always. A true asset. An asset. That's what I was. A line item on his balance sheet. Thank you, Charles," I murmured, the words feeling like dust in my mouth. Davenport turned his full, beaming attention back to Richard. "But that's not what I came to talk about. The Children's Literacy Foundation fundraiser, Richard. What you pulled off was nothing short of a miracle. $1 million raised. In this economy, the board is, well, impressed doesn't begin to cover it. It's the kind of bold, philanthropic leadership that gets a man noticed for the CEO track." I froze, the champagne flute in my hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. My project, my work, for 6 agonizing, wonderful months. I had poured every ounce of my soul into that foundation. I had spent sleepless nights drafting proposals. I had called in favors from my college friends. I had planned the media campaign, organized the volunteers, and personally negotiated every single corporate sponsorship. It was the one piece of myself I hadn't let Richard touch. The one thing that was entirely, resurrectingly mine. Richard draped a heavy, proprietary arm around my shoulders, his smile a mask of perfectly calibrated false modesty. "Well, we do what we can, Charles," he said smoothly, his voice resonating with sincerity. "It's important for those of us who have been fortunate to give back. And of course," he squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate to the crowd but felt like a vice, a silent command to play my part. "My dear Eleanor is always so wonderfully supportive of all my endeavors. A true rock. Supportive." He had reduced my blood, my sweat, my intellect, my very soul, to support. He was stealing my achievement, my one small, fierce victory, right in front of my eyes, presenting it to his boss and his peers as his own gleaming trophy. The rage that rose in me was a white-hot, silent thing. It burned away the numbness, the fear, the years of practiced, soul-killing submission. The little group around us, Davenport, Catherine, a few other board members, was listening intently. The string quartet had paused between songs. In the relative quiet, I found my voice. It was not loud, but it was calm, clear, and carried the unmistakable weight of truth. "It's very kind of you to say, Mr. Davenport," I said, looking directly at him and gently, deliberately, extricating myself from Richard's imprisoning grasp. "I'm just so incredibly proud that the project I managed from conception to completion was such a success for the children." The air crackled. It was a gentle correction, a simple statement of fact, but in the coded, passive-aggressive world of our marriage, it was a declaration of war. Catherine scoffed audibly. Beatrice shot me a look of pure venom. I saw the flash of disbelief, then a wave of cold, reptilian fury wash over Richard's eyes. He had been challenged. He had been contradicted. His narrative had been questioned in front of the most important audience imaginable. He laughed. It was a horrible sound, a condescending, dismissive puff of air designed to render me foolish, hysterical, and irrelevant. Before he spoke, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, not just anger, but a split second of wild, cornered panic. It was the look of a boy terrified of being exposed. A flash of his father's harsh, unforgiving face in his mind's eye. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of cruel superiority. He tightened his grip on my arm again, his fingers digging into my bicep like claws. Ebrutal. Hidden punishment. Darling, he said, his voice a patronizing caress for the benefit of his audience, while his eyes promised a world of pain later. Let's not exaggerate your little hobbies. He turned back to Davenport, his smile brilliant and utterly false. I'm so thrilled she's found something to keep herself busy. But let's be serious. Little hobbies. The words hung in the air, glittering and sharp as broken glass. They sliced through the last of my defenses. This wasn't just an insult. It was an erasure. He was rendering me invisible. Irrelevant. A silly woman with hobbies while he, the great man, did the serious work. The world seemed to narrow to his smiling, hateful face and the searing, radiating pain in my arm. Across the room, I saw Lily. She hadn't moved from her spot near the fireplace. Her face was pale, but her eyes were black and hard as obsidian. She was no longer watching me. She was watching her father, and her hand was still in her pocket, clutching a pen. The performance was over. I let the silence stretch, a tangible thing in the suddenly cold air. I met Richard's furious gaze without flinching. For the first time in a decade, I was not afraid of him. I was simply done. My hobby, I repeated, my voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly silent room, raised over $1 million. Richard, a fact you conveniently forgot to mention in your speech. The world seemed to stop. Every eye in that crowded room was on us. Charles Davenport looked from me to Richard, his jovial expression replaced by one of profound confusion. Beatrice's face was a mask of thunderous rage. Catherine looked as if I had just spit on her expensive shoes. And Richard looked cornered. The mask of the charming, powerful executive shattered. And for a terrifying, split second, I saw the face of a panicked, cornered child. In his eyes, I saw the flicker of an old memory, the shadow of his own father. A cruel, unforgiving man. His hand raised. It was a terror born of a terror he had learned long ago. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, consumed by a wave of pure, reptilian fury. He had been exposed. He had been humiliated. And he reacted in the only way he knew how. His hand moved faster than I could have imagined. The sound of his palm connecting with my cheek was not a slap, it was an explosion. A sharp, ugly crack that echoed off the marble floors and glass walls, silencing the string quartet and the last whispers of conversation. The force of it sent me stumbling backward, my head ringing, my vision blurring with tears of shock and pain. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the room. Richard stood over me, his chest heaving, his hand still raised, his face a grotesque mask of rage. You will never, he snarled, his voice a low, venomous hiss, embarrass anyone in this family again. The dining room was dead silent, a tableau of shock and horror. His colleagues stared, mouths agape. His family looked on, their expressions a mixture of fury at me for causing the scene and terror at the public nature of his crime. In that moment of absolute, ringing silence, a small figure detached herself from the shadows by the fireplace. Lily walked calmly, deliberately, into the center of the room. She was not crying. Her face was pale, but her expression was one of solemn, unnerving composure. She walked past me, past her bellowing father, and straight to the massive 85-inch smart TV that was displaying a rotating slideshow of their perfect life, Richard accepting an award, the two of us on a yacht in Greece, Lily on a pony. "You forgot about the time capsule." "Daddy," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the dead quiet. Richard stared at her, uncomprehending. "Lily, go to your room. Now." She ignored him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, silver cat keychain. With a practiced twist, she separated the head from the body, revealing the tiny USB drive. She reached behind the television, her small fingers finding the port with unerring accuracy. The slideshow of their perfect life flickered and died. For a second, the screen was black. Richard took a step toward her, his hand raised again. "What did you do?" he roared. And then the screen lit up. The image was shaky, filmed from a low angle. It was the video from the spy pen. It showed Richard's face, contorted with rage. It showed his hand swinging through the air. And it showed, in high-definition clarity, the brutal impact of his palm against my cheek. The sound, the horrible, sharp crack, filled the room again, amplified by the television's speakers. The video was on a loop. It played again, and again. The slap, the stumble, the gasp. A silent, repeating testament to the truth. The room was a vacuum. All the air sucked out of it. Charles Davenport looked as if he was going to be sick. Melissa, Catherine's sister-in-law, had her hand clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Just then, the doorbell chimed. Not a loud, angry ringing, but too polite. Insistent chimes that cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. No one moved. The video played on. Slap. Stumble. Gasp. The door to the penthouse swung open. One of the catering staff, his face ashen, had opened it. Standing in the doorway was my father. He was not in a uniform, but in a simple, perfectly tailored gray suit. He looked calm, his expression grave. He was not a colonel, but he radiated an authority that made Richard's blustering rage seem pathetic and childish. Behind him stood a sharp, severe-looking woman in a dark pantsuit and a nondescript man with the watchful, quiet eyes of someone who sees everything. My father's gaze swept the room, taking in everything in an instant. My red, swelling cheek, Richard, frozen in a posture of guilt and rage, his family, stricken and silent, and the enormous television, playing its damning loop. His eyes finally rested on Lily, who was standing, small and defiant, beside the screen. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Richard," my father said, his voice quiet, but carrying the immense weight of a final judgment. He stepped into the room, his companions following him. Judge Mitchell. Richard stammered, his bravado evaporating, like smoke. This is a private family matter. It ceased to be a private matter the moment you put your hands on my daughter," my father replied, his voice still unnervingly calm. He walked to the marble coffee table in the center of the room and placed a handsome, leather-bound legal folio upon it. The soft thud of the leather on stone was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. The woman in the pantsuit stepped forward. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm lead counsel from the firm that handles your company's internal HR complaints and ethics violations." She gestured to the folio. "My colleague and I have been retained by your wife." My father opened the folio. Richard, he said. This contains your wife's signed medical reports from 3 separate emergency room visits for accidents over the past 4 years. It contains financial statements documenting sustained economic abuse and the deliberate restriction of assets. It contains a preliminary injunction, effective immediately, and it contains sworn, notarized affidavits from 3 separate members of your building staff who have heard your disagreements. He paused, his gaze flicking to the television, and then back to Richard's ashen face. The video your daughter just provided is simply the capstone on a very well-documented case. He slid a single piece of paper and a pen out of the folio. You have 2 options. Option 1, you sign this divorce and settlement agreement tonight. It cedes this apartment, the summer home, and 60% of all liquid assets to Eleanor. It agrees to a permanent restraining order and supervised visitation with your daughter. At her discretion, you will walk out of here tonight with a suitcase. And this will be handled quietly and efficiently. He let the words hang in the air. Option 2, he continued, his voice dropping slightly, is that you refuse. And at 9 a.m. tomorrow, copies of this entire folio, including the high-resolution video file, will be filed with the NYPD, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and a full, unredacted copy will be delivered to every single member of your company's board of directors, including Mr. Wanan Davenport. He nodded politely toward Richard's boss. I suspect an executive morality clause will be invoked before lunch. The guests began to melt away, murmuring excuses, their eyes averted, not wanting to be witnesses to the final, brutal execution. Richard's face had gone from red to white to a sickly, mottled gray. He looked at his mother. Adespérate. Pleading look in his eyes. Beatrice stared back at him, her face a mask of cold fury. Not for what he had done, but for being caught. You have disgraced this family, she whispered, before turning on her heel and sweeping out of the room, Catherine trailing in her wake like a shadow. Richard stared at the paper on the table, then at my father's implacable face, then at me. He finally seemed to understand. He hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost everything. He sank into a nearby armchair, his body deflating, a puppet with its strings cut. He looked, for the first time, like a small, weak man. He picked up the pen. A year later, Lily and I sat on the floor of our new apartment. It wasn't a penthouse, but a sunny, airy brownstone with a small garden out back. It was filled with books and plants, and the sound of my daughter's laughter. I had sold the penthouse and used the settlement to create a new foundation, a branch of the one I had worked on, this one dedicated to providing legal aid to women escaping abusive situations. I was in my first year of law school. Lily was showing me her latest project on her new tablet. It was another time capsule, but this one was filled with videos of us baking, of my father teaching her how to play chess, of sunlight streaming through the leaves in our garden. Mom, she said, looking up from the screen, her eyes clear and bright. Do you think he'll ever understand why we did it? I thought for a moment, looking around at the life we had built from the ashes of the old one. I don't know if he will. My love, I said, pulling her into a hug. But what's important is that we understood. We knew that the truth, no matter how terrifying, is the only thing that can truly set you free. She snuggled against me, and I held her tight. My brave, brilliant daughter who had stared into the darkness and turned on a light. We had saved each other. If this story of finding a voice in the darkness and the courage it takes to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes, moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone. And in the comments below, Tell us about a time you found the strength to stand up for yourself or someone else. Your stories give us all courage and remind us that even in the quietest moments, we can be architects of our own liberation